The port cities of Genoa and Naples had literally been crawling with individuals and families waiting to board vessels west, leaving as frequently as 3 times a week in those days. Lydia had made a point of staying clear of them as much as she could, however, figuring that as long as she remained in motion somehow, her chances of having to engage with any of them were probably the smallest. But at the Via Balbi, it was almost impossible not to get drawn in with them in some way, and be thus reminded of how her own appetite for travel and discovery wasn't at all that unique. In all, there must have been dozens of these transit houses, as they were called, in which had steadily sprouted around the harbour over the years to accommodate the ever-growing stream of bodies entering the city from the countryside bound for the Atlantic. And every topic of conversation, from the docks to the train station along the Corso, had in some way to do with that journey west, as well as the adventures one could expect once on it. Each story was more fantastic and hard to believe than the other, to a point where after a while it became difficult to distinguish fact from fiction, inflated to disproportion by the hysteria of some kind of common destiny. No matter how hard Lydia tried, there was just no escaping these soon-to-be citizens of a continent that in the end no one seemed to know very much about. No matter where she turned, she found her impulse to transport herself beyond every horizon just for the sake of changing who she could be, smeared by exaggeration and most often utter ignorance. Even though, in between the tales of the savages that came out of the Venezuelan jungles to kill the men and steal the women out of the newly founded towns, or the epic storms one was likely to experience out in the open ocean, Lydia was able to pick up some useful information about the trip as well. And this is how she learned that her ship cart would include 2 daily meals during her journey, that these were always served on second deck, and so on. Or for instance, that by the time they reached the coast of Brazil, there would be a shortage of fruits and vegetables, and that it was thus advisable to feed on as many of those as one could before embarking. As she twisted her way through knots of history preserved in granite and marble along the streets of this port city, corridors radiating straight out of the bay and into the hills, a strange sort of melancholy began to settle over her, one that seemed to spring out of her own need to be disconnected and detached somehow from the things she saw. More than ever before, she hoped to get lost, to dissolve, and that perhaps in a moment of illumination, by some cathartic glance at some insignificant object, she might at last discover something, anything, that would bring her a sense of belonging to the thing she was about to part with forever. On the 5th day before her departure, after crossing the Piazza Dante with the steady tread of someone in the habit of having to kill time, her feet involuntarily slowed down before a window displaying a particular kind of spectacle that captivated her at once. In the window she could see men sitting around tables cluttered with glassware, and ashtrays filled with debate and worldly conversation, cigars being pressed to lips behind long mustaches, which years later she would be reminded of when admiring the tusks on walruses basking in the sun along the coast of southern Chile. She wasn't sure what had actually made her stop, and was downright baffled with herself when she actually opened the door to enter a place that was by no means in the habit of serving women, and even less women as young as she was then. The throaty sound of men conversing moved past her in a steady wave that was immediately muffled by the thick curtains against the walls and the plush carpets that covered the marble floors in random patches. The smell of liquor mixed with the smoke and the essence of coffee gave the salon a strange lure of a syrupy boil, a pleasant kind of density she found. She sat down at one of the few tables still free near the back. It felt good to let the weight off her feet for a while, to feel her hands glow and tingle from the wet November outside. She carefully observed her surroundings without actually gawking, and immediately picked up the trail of a cigar that seemed considerably sweeter and more flowery than its Arabian counterparts around it. As inconspicuously as she could, she tried to locate its origin and soon discovered that it was coming from the table right next to her, from two men engaged in conversation, conducted in a rather focused and complex tone. The way conversation between men can sometimes sound casual and businesslike at the same time. But it was the scent of what she would later learn was Costa Rican tobacco that strengthened her resolve to push forward and let fate unveil the world that just had to be so much larger than anything she might have ever imagined.